Welcome to Leadership Bites with myself, your host, Guy Bloom. This is a leadership podcast where I have conversations with colleagues, I chat with guests, and sometimes there'll be just me talking. You can connect with me at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and please tell everyone. It's video as well, so. But anyway, here we go. Actual recording is higher quality. There we go. So listen, Dawn, it is lovely to have you on this episode of Leadership Bites. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And, you know, you and I have known each other for some time, so it goes without saying that I know who you are, but it'd be just great just to get that, you know, if you were at a barbecue and somebody said, "Oh, what do you do?" You know, just to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Of course. So I'm Dawn Airey, and what I do now is I'm plural. So I chair 3 companies, sit on 3 other boards, have 2 young children, and I'm interested and curious in anything and everything, but particularly human beings. So that's how I introduce myself at a barbecue. But if I'm being jovial, I'll go, "My name's Dawn Airey, and I'm an alcoholic." Oops, sorry, wrong barbecue.
But we've all been there. So, yeah. And it covers up for the fact you might be. So there we go.
I'm not.
So let's just bring that to life a little bit. That and this isn't your CV, but this is just to give people a sense of when they're hearing the topic, because we're going to talk about leadership and culture in teams. And for people just to have a sense of, you know, what's that individual's context and where's it coming from. Just bring to life those stepping stones to where you are now.
Sure. I knew from a pretty early age that I wanted to tell stories or facilitate storytelling. So it was inevitable I was going to end up in print or then television. And this was in the 80s. I went into telly. And being a woman in television in the 80s, which was pretty much dominated, and forgive me because you're a male guy, but by Cro-Magnon man, it was an interesting period of time. But because I was a woman, I was actually rather good at what I did. And I started off as a sort of producer and then quickly got into television commissioning, deciding what went out. I sort of whisked my way around British commercial broadcasting. So started as a trainee, ran arts and entertainment at Channel 4, was managing director of channels and services at Sky, which was basically all programming apart from sport, founded and created Channel 5 as its creative director and ultimately was its chief executive. And then from there, I've sort of spent a bit of time on the West Coast working for one of the tech giants, Yahoo. And then my last full-time executive role was chief executive of the photographic agency Getty Images. And now, like I said, I chair 2 theatre companies, professional game of women's football, sit on a tech company, sit on the board of a property company, and I sit on the board of Channel 4. So I've got a very interesting group of companies and individuals I'm involved in.
And I think that's one of the things I kind of, and of course, you know, we talk about these things in a nutshell, and each one is its own topic of conversation. But one of the things I've always admired about you is that curiosity and that inherent passion that you have. And I know, of course, you know, the job is the job, but I've always seen you bring that sort of inherent energy and you know, deep care for people into the space that you operate in. So I'd really like to just talk about teams, I guess, because teams and culture. And I don't necessarily want to say what do you think a great team is and what do you think a great culture is, because in some respects, you know, that's maybe a little bit too easy just to go in at what aspiration looks like, you know. But I think what I'm more interested in is when people come together, when you go into an organisation, you're presented, you know, there is the statement, you get the team that you deserve. But, you know, when you turn up on day one, you've got the team that you've got, right? But there comes a point where it's the team that you deserve, because you've either managed them, coached them, mentored them, counselled them, exited them, whatever it is. So there just comes a point of ownership, I guess. So I'm really intrigued by the stepping stones of walking into an organisation where you've got to demonstrate that you can hit the floor running. You've got to put some scores on the doors, all those kind of things. You've got to, you're reliant to a point on the people that you have already in the organisation, and yet you have to craft a team to be able to operate in a place and a space that you would want it to. And I'm just interested in that, insert name of company here. When you go in, how do you do those stepping stones?
Sure. Well, really interesting question, and I have to say how I've done that has evolved. So I went into leadership positions really very, very quickly. So in my late 20s, I had roles that, so when I looked around the network, people 20 years older were just getting. And so I've got a lot of experience, and I've made a lot of mistakes, but I've also learned from those mistakes. So it's interesting, when I started out, when I was being promoted, said, right, I want you to go and run this team. Certainly in my early stages of my career, I would almost have made my decisions before I'd formed any relationships with anybody, and would clear out most people and start again, because I've been brought in to affect change. And actually I've learned as I got more experience that isn't the right approach. Sometimes you do have to move fast, and you can know quite quickly. And I would argue, actually, in the latter half of my career, every leadership team that I've inherited, you tend to know pretty quickly who wants to be with you on this journey, who do you want to be with you on this journey, who has potential but needs to be showing up in a different way. So I remember, I'm going to go right back to television. So and it was when I started actually at Channel 4, when I was controller of arts and of entertainment, so responsible for everything apart from factual and news and current affairs. And I had everything from movies to sport to acquisitions to arts to entertainment. And I'm not going to name names because that will be inappropriate, but one of the commissioning editors came up to me and said, I don't like you and I don't rate you. And I said, well, that's very interesting, because I don't know you, but I've heard an awful lot about you. And what I've heard is not very complimentary. So this is how it's going to work. You're a right real pain in the arse. So if the gain of if the pain of working with you isn't outweighed by the gain, I will have you out of the door straight away. I will fire you, and so I'll be very, very clear, very, very clear. And also, I expect you to be more collaborative and slightly more pleasant to your colleagues. And this person was absolutely astounded. Said nobody's ever spoken to me about that. And I said, well, one thing I learned very early on from a wonderful mentor, my first boss, Andy Allen, was feedback's a gift. So I'm giving you some feedback now, and you've got to decide. And don't think I'm mucking around. And actually, he proved to be a really good team member, and expectations hadn't been laid. So what I've done in, I would say, my last 3 CEO roles, when I've gone in and inherited a team, is listen to everybody. And I do think it's, when you go in a new role, people expect you to have all of the answers, and you have clearly a view and an idea about how the business should be run, the strategy, the direction. But there's nothing like observing, listening, and then opining. And I always say you've got 2 of these, and 1 of these. Use them in equal proportion early on. And that can be very disarming for people, because they expect you, well, you're the new leader, you've got all the answers. Now, leaders don't have all of the answers. They have a sense of direction. They have a sense of what the opportunity is. They'll have a sense of what's not working. But you need to validate it, and you need to listen. And so, I think I said about my recent executive roles, and both companies needed a fair amount of change in attitude at the top. So what I did in both cases was engaged my leadership team in sort of really trying to understand them as individuals, their motivations, and then talking to them about the strategy of the business, what's going well, what isn't going well, and then extend that into the whole organisation. So I always believe in doing a sort of whole organisational audit. Have you got regular feedback from staff to understand what is going on? Because staff always know. There's no two ways about it. Your co-workers always know what's working well, what isn't working well. Who are the team players? Who are the outliers? who needs to be got rid of, who's taking the piss, who's a superstar but hasn't been given the opportunity. So I just level with people really very early on, which is I'm going to form judgments, but it's a level playing field. So let's all engage. And actually, there is no superstar in this. Everybody needs to be a giant, and everybody's a giant and works well. You're going to get giant outcomes. So I think you need to be. I've always tried to be really clear on strategy by engaging both with the organisation and with the leadership team. Okay, what is the strategy? And then iterating and constantly communicating, having very clear KPIs. This is what you need to do. This is how you fit into the organisation. This is how you're going to be judged. And by the way, you're a grown-up. I'm going to let you get on and do what you need to do. And I don't need to know everything all the time. I'm not a control freak. However, I will deep dive when I need to. And just go off and do what you do. And when you need counsel or want to debate something, bring it back to the senior leadership table. Bring it back to me. We can debate stuff. If you make mistakes, that's fine. Human beings make mistakes. You're not going to be monstered for it. Learn from the mistakes. Try not to make too many, please. And by the way, I'm going to just let you run your business sector, and I expect you to do really well, and I expect to pay you really well. I want you to be successful, and I'm going to take an active interest in your success. And then the other thing, and you will hear this from everybody, I'm sure, that you have on your podcast, Guy, I actively try to employ brilliant people, and I am not in any way anxious or undermined by employing people who are far smarter than me, because I think I get the benefit of that. So I always think as a leader, you're a bit of a conductor. You need to know what the sound you want from this orchestra, but you don't and can't necessarily play any single one of those instruments to the high quality that your musicians can. But you're there bringing them together to get the best out of them. And you do that because they know what their role is. And then, I've always found leadership quite simple, but I've always tried to be, and I can be quite disarming because I am interested in human beings. So I remember simple things, and these things always make a difference. You remember people's partners' names, you remember birthdays, you remember the names of the kids, you remember where they went on holiday. You're interested and engaged with your leadership team, and indeed as broad a church as you can in the organisation. Those things matter. It really does matter. They might seem soft, but they're not. They deliver really great business outcomes if you've got the right people, because you feel as if, actually, I'm important. I understand the role that I play in this organisation. I know I'm recognised. I know I have a voice, which again, I believe in massive over-communication and expect all of my direct reports and leadership to equally communicate with their co-workers. So they've got, how can you ask somebody to take responsibility and an active interest, to be an active contributor in a company if you don't know what's going on? So I also believe in being really transparent. And politics, I always think, comes out of in businesses of, I know something that you don't know and it could be to my advantage. Don't believe in any of that at all. Everybody can know everything, apart from obviously the most personal things around individuals and the most financially sensitive information. But otherwise, everyone should know. We should celebrate success. We should understand failure. We should be actively curious about competitors. So it's all for me, and always has been intuitive. Always been intuitive around leadership, which is ultimately treat others how you expect to be treated. And I want to be treated, with respect. I want to be paid well. I want to be invested in as an individual. They're trained, it really is quite simple if you've got the right folks in. And if you haven't, and you clearly in any leadership team, there's always going to be outliers, and trying to understand why they're an outlier, and actually if they're just demonstrating bad behaviours because they've never been told otherwise, help them. And if they can't change, and people can change, but if they can't change, then they have to be exited, because if you don't do it, somebody else will down the line. So I often think, I try to, and this is it's an interesting knack of when I've had to let go of people, make them feel that actually it was a good experience because you're invested in me and I'm not right in this organisation, and I can see that. And to thrive, I need to change my behaviours or go somewhere else to suit my skills. So that's a very long answer, a bit of a ramble, but there we are.
That's perfect.
But there's hopefully some things you can pick up from there. We can talk.
I'm going to get everybody
further.
to listen to that section. Let me define what it is to step into a role at that level. I have heard a lot there about clarity, giving people that clarity. So there's a certainty and then an accountability. If you have that clarity at the level you're operating, then I need you to then own that and have that accountability. It's almost if you're at the big table, there's a set of expectations I've got. But with that, I'm going to trust, because if you're operating at the level you should be, and I need you to be, then it's not so much off you go, but it's go and do what you do. And then I'm here to either clear the path for you or to act as counsel or etc. So, that's a beautiful thing, and I can imagine, and I have seen how that can bring out the best in people, because they go, wow, this is it. I'm actually being allowed to do my flipping job, and it can set people free. There are then people that either through just lack of self-awareness don't know the game that they're sometimes even playing. They've habitualised to a politic, and so they actually think they're playing a straight game, but what they're actually doing is playing the game that they're used to, which isn't necessarily what actually good looks like. So I do come across people that, and of course there are those that maybe have, bad intentions, and in some respects they highlight themselves relatively quickly because they make overt statements and strategic decisions that really highlight what they're really about. So that those usually show themselves quite quickly. But it's the people that I think at a senior level, maybe the role's outgrown them, or the habits that they've got. They're not bad people, but they've just, as you say, nobody's given them that feedback. And I wonder, maybe it's an advice thing, maybe it's an observation where you've nailed it, or you go, mental note to self, I should have done that differently. But the timeline on somebody that's good and nice and pleasant and engaging and is trying and is desperate to contribute, I always think is a very hard thing for a leader that has a level of empathy versus somebody that's just being an outright bugger. That's just much easier, isn't it? Right, you're being a git, right? That's, I know where I am with you. But for the person that maybe was good, has moments of flashes of, oh my God, if you were like that all the time, almost what I call a skimmer, somebody that just does enough to stay on the surface, but you're just knowing that they're not really operating at that level. I just wonder how that pans out with you.
Well, it's really hard, isn't it? Because I think again, you have to be, as a leader, you have to be very strict with yourself as well and look at your motivation. It's human nature to want to put people around you that you like and are often similar to yourself, but we know that doesn't make great teams, because you need diversity of thought and background and interest and a whole host of things. That doesn't equate to a lack of common, I would say, courtesy. And I've employed plenty of people who, to be frank, I hugely respect, but I don't want to spend a time having a drink with them at the end of the day. But business-wise, do a fantastic job, and they don't do anything that is in anything but the interests of the team. But maybe, like I said, not somebody you would necessarily go for a drink for. And actually, I've had some great relationships with a couple of folks who've travelled with me on various companies who our relationship falls into. It's a wonderful professional relationship, but it doesn't span into personal. Quite interesting, actually. My father, he was an architect and engineer in his practice, and his partner he was with for 40 years, professional. They absolutely and utterly were hand in glove and built a very successful business, but they didn't mix personally. But they did professionally. It's sort of interesting, and it worked. But I suppose the issue is if you've got somebody, and we all have it in teams from time to time, who is actually the reverse of what you say, who actually is a bit edgy and they're a bit out for themselves, but they're really bloody good at what they do. And do you hoof them out, or do you sort of put very tight boundaries around them with a watchful eye on them because what they deliver is so important. And I think it's a very delicate balance, because if that person is displaying behaviours that really aren't consistent with the behaviours of a leadership team in the company, then they have to go. But there are plenty who I've seen who just I would say ice skate on very thin ice, and you just have to have a watching brief. But the folks who are good, who are very amiable, but actually aren't pulling their weight to the extent they should, that is difficult. But you do actually have to do something about it, because it's not fair on those below in the organisation. So the smart, every organisation is an ecosystem. People, if they can't see a line to progress, then they'll leave you. And we all know millennials and centennials are going to have 8 jobs and they'll move around, and won't have their loyalty to companies is relatively de minimis. But you do want some loyalty, and you do want to offer a career path so you can attract the best talent. And actually, if you're allowing just a little bit of softness, it's identified really, really acutely. And as people are really smart and really intelligent. And the fascinating thing about organisations is everybody observes everybody. Everybody truly knows what is going on, and who's in and who's out, and who's not pulling the weight and who is. And if you as the leader aren't on top of that and aren't ensuring that actually there's a consistent set of behaviours and achievement level that's required to be able to hold on to your job, let alone to be promoted, if you're not on top of that, then you're going to lose credibility too. It's like everything. It's got to be constantly calibrated, and it's about fairness as well. Back to that point I said earlier, it's about being fair and transparent. So you can't let people hang around in an organisation if they're just good enough.
That's a thing I've really come to observe, which is very rarely does somebody not have a line of sight on what their concept of good is. This is how I want the company to look like, this is the culture, this is the environment, etc. And the problem comes when people sense, because I think you're right, I've heard you say it a few times, people know. And it doesn't matter what they're telling you, there's a word on the street, there's a narrative around the environment and the individuals. So when at a senior level people are given leeway that breaks the narrative about what the culture is, that's where I think I see the first domino fall in terms of a person's credibility being lost. You say A, but I can point at B and C and D where that's not true, because they bring in the money or because they blah, 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 blah. And so the moment you get that live in an organisation, I think that's when a senior kind of teams or individuals' credibility starts to drop rapidly. Yeah.
But equally, again, back to organisations I've led, there are often protected species in an organisation.
Right.
Or, CEOs' favourites, who are just so not displaying the behaviours of the company and are just so not delivered, but they've got away through those personal relationships or whatever with actually they just haven't shown up. And then if you get rid of one or two of those quickly, my goodness gracious, that sends a ripple through the organisation.
And
I've done that in my last 3 roles.
Right.
As I said earlier, I take time, but I don't take too much time. When someone is such an obvious outlier, and it's just, and having those conversations with somebody saying, actually, it's the end of your career here, and especially for some individuals who've been around organisations for decades, that they get away with it, and then it becomes this institutionalised. Well, there's the outlier there, never turns up, and doesn't display behaviours, might turn up to put, for a lunch, but really, they're scared. It's just not fair on the organisation. It's wholly inappropriate for that individual. But there are in I dare say most organisations, certainly in the ones I've been CEO of the last 3 occasions, those individuals who you very quickly move on. You move on those straight away, because that's important for the organisation. Actually, there is a new leader in town. Yes, they are. They are demonstrating the behaviours they are asking from us. And there's no messing. I mean, you can stamp your authority on an organisation pretty goddamn quickly by doing a few of those things.
Yeah, it's symbolic. Yeah. So, and for me, one of I'm just thinking about things I've I constantly get coming up as a theme. One of them is what we've been talking about, is how do I come into an organisation? How do I create authority? Yes, but control and set a standard. How do I deal with people maybe that are, sort of gone into that lazy space or whatever it is. But I'm also really intrigued by the ability of a CEO or somebody in a senior leadership role to keep their finger on the pulse about what's really being said. There is the old adage of the Queen thinks the world smells of paint because there's somebody used to, but there's 3 feet, they're 3 feet in front of her or them. The King thinks the world smells of change. I'll have to change that metaphor. But
I get it.
Yeah, exactly. Because, they're being presented with, a kind of a false truth in the world. And when you go into an organisation, am I really hearing the truth? All the way to I've now been here a while. Am I now still hearing the truth? And I wonder how, you kind of approach that, knowing that you're not just being offered, I suppose, the stuff that makes it treacle on the spoon kind of for you.
Well, I think it's absolutely, it's absolutely and utterly, it's as important as meeting investors as meeting your co-workers. So, and I'm only speaking from how I do it, which is I try every day to walk around, even if it's just for half an hour, just walk around and chat to people. Listen, when we last met at Getty, I did that all the time, and I did work slightly batshit crazy hours. So early in the morning, late at night, always went into the post room. You knew who knew what was going on where. And if you're curious around individuals love nothing more than to talk about themselves and whatever. It's very easy to pick up. I think it's always about communication. It's always about being consistent. It's always about being open. And it's also about, people will talk to you as well and confide in you if you confide in them. So I remember when I first rocked up at Getty and said, I let out money, you'd probably think, what the hell? We've got somebody who has no experience in photography at all. What on earth are you doing as our CEO? So I sort of took them through my television career, at Yahoo, and then told them lots of stories about things that I got right, things that I got wrong. And I told them about my family, I told them about what I liked on telly, and I told them what I liked to eat. And this is me, warts and all, And if you make yourself accessible and not even vulnerable, but you share, you just say, I might be your CEO, but I don't have all the answers, and I made loads of mistakes, and I'm human, and I'm really interested in human beings. And then you wander around, and you also know who are key people in terms of sort of who are cultural magnifiers within organisations. It goes a hell of a long way. But you have to work at it, and you have to, I've always made time to walk around, and every day, even now in the organisations where I'm not an executive, but I'm a non-executive, I'll always talk to who's on front desk. I'll always, I'll talk to everybody at every level, because they'll give me good insight and a good sense and feel for, the company and its culture. And also, it's good for them to have the engagement of a senior person, because it's that old adage, and I hate to use truisms, but people work for people, and if we feel valued, and the boss knows you, it makes a massive difference. But you have to work hard at it, and also I think you've got to formalise communication. And again, that's what I've always done. I've had all hands on a weekly basis. I've always had anybody can contact me anytime. I've always had, you've got my email, you've got my phone number. And people say, well, that's mad, you've got thousands of people working with you. Yeah, but thousands of people won't contact me, but they know they can if they need to and want to. And that is really, really important. So when somebody does, probably going to be of substance, and you respond quickly. And that's just another discipline I've always had. It drives me crazy if others don't do it, which is I always respond to, unless there's some extraordinary reason, and if there is, you'll be known. I will respond to everything within 24 hours, if not sooner. You can't always do it immediately, but if you want to communicate, you're going to get an answer. And Well, it slightly drives my assistant mad because she goes, you don't know this person and they've written to you. And this is me now in a non-executive role. I said, yes, but they've had the wherewithal to work out our email address, and it's an interesting, we're going to deal with it. But that's just how I run, my professional life, and it sort of served and worked well. But having your finger on the pulse of an organisation, I would argue, as the leader of the organisation, is absolutely critical. I mean, it's as critical as hitting your numbers, is understanding the pulse of the organisation, and you can only do that by making the time to invest in the folks who are working with you.
And I love this. I call it doing the long walk, which is if you're on the same level and you've got to go to somebody else's office, drop down a couple of levels, walk through the reception and come up the back stairs. Doesn't matter how you do it, but do the long walk so people physically see you in the organisation. Exactly, they have a sense of you, etc. And did work with an organisation once, and the feedback was in the same building, they're just not present. Well, how come? We're in every day. Well, of course. And when I did a diagnostic and went down to the canteen and showed them certain pictures, do you know who these people are? No, the canteen staff didn't know who they are. Why? Because they didn't eat in the canteen either, and all these kind of little things. Yeah. But you're right. It's an easy thing to say at interview to get the job. How would you get your finger on the pulse? Oh, I'd make sure everybody comes out with the same adage. But what are you doing a year later when you're busy? You're up to your eyeballs in it. What's the stuff? And if it drops off the table, then that's an indicator, isn't it, that it's not actually something real for you.
Yeah, go and chat to people. I mean, I remember at Channel 5 when we launched Channel 5, we did it there's nothing to do with leadership. It's just about human beings collating around a focal point. We had a tea trolley twice a day, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. People loved the tea trolley. Free Kit Kat and a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. That seemed quite revolutionary in the 90s. But it was just a chance for everyone to stop, pause, come together socially, go back to their desks. But to your point about visibility, I know when I started at Getty, the CEO, I don't know if you ever went to my office in New York, it was wonderful. It was vast, really lovely. I never had an office. I mean, it's almost the size of a football pitch. Yeah. And I thought, well, A, I should be sitting out with everybody else, so I had a desk outside with everyone else. But B, it had frosted glass all the way down it. So nobody knew. So my first day, I said, get rid of that frosted glass. It's got to be transparent. People can see. I'm in my office. Door is open. If it's closed, they can see why, because I've got somebody in there I'm having a conversation with. That, just in terms of a symbolic but a really important symbolism, first thing went, oh my God, she's taken down all the frosting. You can look in and see what she's doing in her office all day, every day. So just simple little things, but really important culturally.
Well, American offices were the first time I realised, oh God, these people have got front rooms in their offices. I've never been into offices before, not just yours, but in the US, where it's like, this is actually somebody's front room. There's sofas and carpets.
A family of 5 living in mine.
It's fantastic. I was like, we're missing out. We're missing out in the UK. They're doing it completely different. But no, I do remember that. So I think that's a massive thing, isn't it? That sense that people can connect. I remember Alan Layton. I remember going to a talk with him, and he just said, he had when he was at the post office, and he just said, I've got this beeper, and anybody can call it. And he says, and I know what you're thinking. It must go off a lot. He says it doesn't, but when it does, I pay attention to it, because just sending me bizarre text messages doesn't go well, but he had that sense of being available, being able to be contacted, right, regardless of the individual. So I think keeping that going is, yes, I think a lot of people go, we'll see how long this lasts, and actually if it's still going strong, it's an indicator. And I think also it's a good call to arms for your own people, isn't it? Your team, your peers, your direct reports who are that executive. For them, how connected are they? And for some people, that's quite difficult to step out of their habit of being quite, I'm very busy, I don't know if I've got time for this. In comes this news, I want you to spend time being present and being available. That's it's a simple request, but for some people who are go, they find it very hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I'm not going to name companies, but one company I thought I brought in a whole host of new people at the top. We were diverse, because before it wasn't diverse. We had a big emphasis on communication, and staff said, and actually they would have never have done this under the previous leadership, said, well, you lot think you're so good, but actually you're not. We're going to put a mirror up to you. You're not reflecting either the folks that you employ or our customers. So, what are you going to do about it? And that was just sort of a bit of a revolution. And the instant response of someone was, well, we need to be defensive. That's ridiculous. Look, there is lots of diversity at the top. So, well, we might think so, but our staff don't think so. And actually, we need to sit down and let's look at it and think, Christ, there isn't really. And then we had to be accountable to the staff and said, you're right, and this is what we are going to do about it, but we need your help too. And that was a really great moment for the organisation. Again, very visible demonstration of we're listening and we respond to challenge that you say, and we're not going to be defensive. And the organisation previously wouldn't have done that. It wouldn't feel sufficiently confident to do that. But back to all of us and my emphasis on you have to communicate with your teams continually. You can't say the same thing often enough, to be honest. And that resulted in a better outcome and actually in a better performance of the company as a result.
So what I am hearing in that, and I've always seen this with, there's comms, which is data going out, but you're talking about human interaction. Show yourself, give a level of vulnerability. It's okay. It doesn't mean that you have to sort of throw yourself on your sword and my mum locked me in a cupboard when I was 3. You don't have to go down there. But there is something about letting people see the human being behind the human doing. And that doesn't mean they're going to, again, like you, love you, even sort of, have a sense of comfort with you, because we can't all like anybody, but you're really talking about let people know that you are human and you're in a big job and you're trying your best and you are approachable. So it sounds so simple, but it's actually one of the hardest things I find for senior people to do, which is just to make time. Because guess what? They're busy running large organisations. So listen, I'm alert to time, and I guess before I kind of let you go, I would like to just get one. It could be a quote that you've got, or a book that you think, you know what, I think that made a big difference to me, or just a little story of just something that somebody said to you that you go, do you know what, that made a big difference to me. So give a gift of a gift to the world.
I don't know about a gift to the world, but it's a little anecdote. But from somebody I adored. So my first boss was the most wonderful man, late Andy Allen, and he was managing director at Central Television. Big Geordie, very working class, and he saw something in me and gave me the most extraordinary opportunities to start my career at ITV. And he had all sorts of pearls of wisdom, but he couldn't quite believe the role that he had and where he'd come from. And he always said to me, be humble, employ the best possible people, and find something you love and just keep doing it, and then you'll be great. And it just really, and it sort of almost sounds like sort of motherhood and apple pie, but those are pretty good bases on which to go through life, let alone, I think, lead an organisation. Be humble, employ good people, and have fun. So, serve me well. Hopefully, maybe it resonates with your listeners.
I think I might put it on a T-shirt. It would be fantastic. So listen, Dawn, thank you so much for giving us, and myself in particular at the time, it's just lovely to have you on and just to talk. I always get a joy from it. I'm going to get you to stay on for a few moments just to make sure that everything loads up. But just other than that, from me and everybody else, thank you so much for making the time, and we'll no doubt speak and connect again.
Thank you, a real pleasure. Thank you very much, Guy.
That's it, so I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share so others get to hear about us, and subscribe so you keep up to date on new episodes. Also visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with me and find out more about executive coaching, team effectiveness and changing culture. Oh, and of course you can buy my book Living Brave Leadership on Amazon. So on that note, see you soon.